Welcome to our discussion of the components to effective online teaching. I'm Dr. Toney of Hope International University. We want to look in this discussion at some of the similarities and the differences between a traditional classroom teaching experience and an online classroom teaching experience, and hopefully to help us to gain some confidence in doing online teaching effectively. First of all, we want to start off by having an understanding that there is not a whole lot of difference between online learning and basic traditional learning. As Susan Coe and Stephen Russin put it, there's no need to start from scratch to teach online. You can apply what you already know and add to it by using new tools and techniques adapted for the online environment. In other words, the basic pedagogical skills of a teacher still apply. So I would encourage you to consider what are your strengths and what are areas where you can show improvement when it comes to your teaching. And as you develop your online courses, try to develop those courses based on your strengths. But at the center of the course is still the instructor, is still the teacher, as the facilitator for helping student learning. There are some distinctions, though, when it comes to online learning, some differences that we need to keep in mind when we construct an online class versus a traditional class. First of all, we can think about the online class being something that is student-centered, where the instructor acts like Socrates' midwife, helping to birth knowledge in a student. So rather than being the sage on the stage, we are now the guide on the side. Connected to this, as we're helping the students to discover learning for themselves, comes student ownership and their own active learning in the online environment. So no longer can a student just hide in the back of the class expecting the instructor to explain the readings that maybe they didn't do or the homework they didn't do. In an online class, there is really no room to hide. You have to be an active participant in the class, and it becomes very clear right away whether or not a student has done their homework and has done their reading or not. With this ownership comes a better ability of learning. What tends to attract people to the online learning experience is the flexibility and the asynchronous nature of an online class. So you can basically do an online class on your own schedule. No one is required to be online at the exact same time as each other, and so this just allows a great amount of flexibility, whether it's doing evenings or in the mornings or working the weekends. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with the online environment. A challenge for instructors is to draw boundaries in terms of when you will contribute to the educational experience of students and being clear with students when you're available for them in this flexible and asynchronous environment. There's also this sense of continuous feedback or continuous assessment that goes on in an online class. And so as students are going through the course, there is often relatively immediate or very soon feedback that happens on an assignment, on a response, as students are going through the program, and this helps generate the strengths of the online course. There's also a bit of a different pacing when it comes to an online course, and so I would encourage you to think in terms of chunks or in terms of units of information. And so you want to allow for the flexibility of a course so that you aren't thinking necessarily in terms of due dates, but in terms of how much time for a process to occur. We want to be careful of not having 1,000 different assignments for students, but instead to be thinking in bigger chunks of material and ways that students can be learning in units. Looking at some of the basic tools and components to help us with effective online teaching, one of the first things we want to look at is the syllabus, the foundation of any course. Of course, the traditional elements of course descriptions and titles, and now some of the newer elements like program learning objectives, course learning objectives, those sorts of things get included, basic assignments get included, but there are some distinctions when it comes to an online syllabus. You want to include more extensive teaching guides in the syllabus as well as probably in the course site itself to explain in greater detail what your expectations are for actual assignments, because you're not going to have the oral presentation, the same level of interaction that you would have in a live classroom, and so you want to be very clear in your expectations in these teaching guides in the syllabus. It's also important to include elements of netiquette How do we treat each other in a virtual environment? And in some ways, because we cannot see each other, we don't get the sort of visual cues. We have to be careful with our communication patterns in the online environment. Some people like to use emoticons, those little smiley faces and sad faces. Some people don't like to use them. You need to make a decision about how you want people to be interacting with each other. How do you help people to interact with respect and with academic integrity? How do we keep people from getting upset and angry with each other? How do we promote a civil community? These sort of things you want to keep in mind as you create your netiquette statement in your syllabus. What kind of communication patterns are you setting up? This, in the online environment, sometimes we can get into the sense of instantaneous feedback, and so we need to be clear with what we want our feedback patterns to be for students, so that they know, that they're aware that when they send out that email, when they put up that posting, when they submit an assignment, when is it that you are going to get back to them? Are you working on the weekends? Are you working at night? Are you working only during the day? Setting up communication patterns, setting up virtual office hours, these sorts of things can be extremely helpful. Students need to feel connected to you in the online environment. What are your assessment guidelines? What are you doing to help students to understand how to be successful in an assignment? What are your expectations with an assignment? And what are the means of giving them feedback? And how are you using assessment in order to educate, in order to develop the students further in the topics and ideas that you're discussing? Issues of academic integrity, such as plagiarism, still arise, but you have the additional component of fraud. How do you know whether the student on the other end of the computer is really the student who signed up for the course? And so making sure that you're very clear with students of your expectations of what they're doing, as well as if you have any sort of tests, any sort of quizzes, what are your expectations? Can they be open book? Do they need to find a proctor? What sort of things are you putting in place for ensuring academic integrity for your students? Help and support is also crucial. Particularly technical support is important for students to know that they have some sort of access to people that can be helping them when they run into those kind of technical problems, particularly in a first time in an online class. How are they uploading assignments? How do they get videos to work? Those sorts of things can be extremely helpful for help and support for the technical side, as well as things like library support, helping students to have a sense of who else to access, who else are there as resources for them to help them to succeed in the online class become important. When we think about online classes, we also need to think specifically about the communication and online presence of an online class. So, how are you going about communicating? Is it through email with students? Is it through the course announcements that maybe comes with your website? Maybe communication comes through the threaded discussions, and maybe that's the way that you're showing your presence. There's other ways to communicate with students, whether it be something like Twitter or Facebook or Skype or Google Voice. There are different communication patterns that we can put into place, different mediums of communication that we can use in order to let people know that we are present with them in the online environment. And online presence is crucial to the success of an online course. Students need to know that you are available and present for them as they go through their journey. And using these basic patterns of communication become extremely important for you in the online environment. The centerpiece of an online class are the threaded discussions. How are you going about promoting interaction with other students? One of the keys to an online class is have a plan. Map out what your goals and expectations are for your discussions. Think through whether you're asking short questions that require short answers, or whether they're more complex questions. If you have short questions, consider having 3 or 4 in a course of a week. For more complex questions, you want to probably reduce that down to 1 or 2. You want to have these questions focusing on core concepts and ideas in the class, and you want to think through whether your questions are open-ended, generating discussion, or whether you're making more things like statements that are wrapping up discussion. As you get going in your weekly threaded discussions, at the beginning, encouraging more open-ended things with questions. Ending posts often with questions can be helpful, but as you get near the end of the week, you want to begin to wrap up ideas by making more statements, encouraging students to be wrapping up and synthesizing ideas at the end of your discussion. So thinking through that flow and pattern of your discussion is extremely important, and having a plan. Some characteristics of good discussion include having your responses and the responses of students be clear and concise. And you want to put out these expectations in your syllabus. I would recommend something between 40 and 120 words. You want these interactions to be regular and timely. So having students put 4 to 6 posts over the course of 3 to 4 days can be helpful, encouraging them to generate a regular amount of discussion. You want them to be substantial responses to the questions. You want them to be based on logic, and you want them to be based on resources, not simply stating one's own ideas. The great thing about the online environment is that students can take time to craft their ideas before posting them. Encourage students to think through things in ways that are provocative, that are generating discussion ideas, and include your own set of provocative statements, but also having an element where there's explanatory elements, where we're going through and digging in and understanding key concepts and ideas. It's also important to encourage students to be polite, professional, and grammatically correct. We don't want students to simply equate this to putting up some sort of Twitter feed or putting up a status update on Facebook. We want these discussions to be substantive and professional and polite, and that can be especially important in the online environment. With the traditional classroom, lectures tend to be the center, but in an online class, lectures are decentered and more open-ended. They tend to be shorter, between 5 and 20 minutes, and they tend to be used to introduce or to synthesize ideas. The idea is that you're trying to use your lecture as a resource to help empower learning. You might also discover that you want to use other voices for lectures by going out on the internet, or even getting other professors in your department to help introduce ideas through lectures to get a multiplicity of voices so that students are then going out and learning on their own. Some tips when it comes to putting together your lectures include thinking through them in modular terms, that you probably want to have the ability to reconfigure your class in the future. And so if you avoid referencing previous lectures or next lectures, this allows you to reconfigure lectures as you continue to develop your classes. You also might avoid using specific references to textbooks, instead talking about them more generically in terms of the author's name and title of the book, so that if you ever go about changing the textbooks, your lectures are not outdated. You can think through the pacing of slides. Keeping them short, between 1 to 3 minutes per slide, is important, and keeping the limit of the number of words and lines on the slides to a minimum. Possibly a standard like a 6x6 can be helpful. And including images can be helpful, not as decoration, but as a way to illustrate ideas in your slides. But when you use images or sources, be sure to cite those images and sources, what websites you got them from, or what text you got them from, so that we are attributing our resources properly. When it comes to developing lectures, some of the basic tools include having standard equipment like a headset microphone can be helpful. Having a webcam if you want to do videos is helpful. If you want to do audio-only lectures, there's a great free program called Audacity that you can use to develop your audio. If you're putting together video, you might think through using PowerPoint. The newer versions of PowerPoint allow you to make videos on them and even to put those out on the web. You can use Microsoft's Movie Maker or other standard programs to create and capture video of yourself talking with your webcam. If you want to capture images of what's happening on your screen or programs on your screen, there's some great programs that are called screencasting programs that allow you to present your video in another way. When it comes to hosting the video, your school possibly has the ability to host the videos. Otherwise, you can use free hosting services like YouTube and Vimeo. You probably want to set those videos, though, to privacy. You probably also want to ensure in YouTube that the length of your videos can go beyond their standard shorter limits. When you do host things, you do need to keep in mind copyright issues and ownership issues of material, whether it's your material or the material that's being used in a classroom. And so by hosting on a school site, there's certainly advantages to that to protect you and to protect your materials. But there are other resources like YouTube and Vimeo are also great. You can think through the written resources in an online class. Picking your required text, you either want to consider picking texts that are reinforcing your ideas in lieu of not having as much lecture time, or you might consider picking texts that are counterpoints to help generate discussion and digging into ideas. There are certainly research and library challenges in an online class because not every student has great access to library resources, and so helping students to think through their use of the library can be helpful. You want to help steer them away from just doing a simple Google search or citing Wikipedia or the latest blogs or the standard Bible sites out there or generally public domain texts that are outdated and outmoded. Helping them to think through and to use tools like interlibrary loan and examining what your interlibrary loan policies can be helpful. Looking at what the e-reserve policies are, helping them to use web-based search engines of scholarly-based resources like Atla can also be helpful. Helping them to consider whether to use Bible software. There are certain companies out there that offer discounts to bulk purchases of software, and so considering using Bible software can be another way. And students might have to just bite the bullet and purchase resources for their classes. They might have to get them at the beginning of the class to help supplement their research. But when it comes to resources in an online class, particularly if it's a short class, you need to help students to be identifying what resources they need early on so that they are available for them when it comes around time to writing papers and doing assignments. You can also help steer them in the right direction by helping to generate a bibliography, a list of websites that you think are academically sound, turning students towards resources that are quite helpful. And there are a bunch of online resources, and there's an increasing number occurring that are helpful in the various biblical and theological disciplines. Putting this all together, we want to think through our basic flow and pattern of teaching in the online class. Following the three basic steps of introducing ideas, developing them, and ultimately mastering ideas can be an important pattern to lay over assignments, weeks, and ultimately the course. Within a course, you can introduce ideas through various reading, and even your lecture materials can be a way to introduce ideas. To develop ideas, you can use things like the threaded discussions and various projects throughout the course. Mastery of ideas can include classic things like test taking through quizzes and exams, but also by generating milestone exercises and ultimately capstone exercises can be helpful. Milestones tend to be things that occur either during the week or at the end of the week, versus a capstone is the point where you're drawing all the material together at the end of the course. You can think through a week. When are you introducing your ideas? At what point? When are you helping students to develop their ideas? And when do you want them to master that concept for the week? And through the overall flow of the course, at the beginning of the course, introducing ideas, developing ideas in the middle, and mastering ideas towards the end is what you want to think through as you're constructing your flow and pattern of teaching in an online course. There are certainly some challenges that come with teaching online. One of the challenges is technology skills, having to learn a new program, having to learn a new technique for both yourself and the students can be a challenge. How do we go about creating virtual community when we no longer have physical presence, when we don't have cues such as tone and body language? What are we doing to help students to create a community of co-learners? Another challenge can be pacing, this sense that we are always on and that we have this abundant amount of grading. How do we meet those challenges? We can do things like setting basic virtual office hours by thinking through the level of assignments given the amount of work students have, that we are going to have to grade those as well. And so being attentive to grading patterns can be helpful. An online class can be very intense in terms of reading and writing. And what are we doing to help enable students who have different avenues of learning to go about learning if we're doing so much instruction based on reading and writing? The adequacy of resources for doing research is a crucial issue that your library can help you to address, that you need to think through. How are you helping students to get at the good resources to help them with the research? Cheating and plagiarism can take on whole new levels of meaning. And so using things like Turnitin to help with plagiarism can be helpful, but how are you promoting academic integrity in your online class can be a challenge as well. What are some best practices for us? How can we make an online class the most effective? First of all, be working on being present and available to students. This is one of the most important things to students, that they feel connected to you, and having that connection in the thread discussions, having them in emails, giving assignments back quickly, these sorts of things help students to feel present, that you're present and available to them. Developing a supportive community becomes important in an online class. So what are you doing to help students to connect to each other, to their peers? How do we decenter the class from ourselves as the expert to helping students to make connections with each other? Can be incredibly important in the online class. Being very specific and clear in your expectations is crucial in the online environment, because students can't just come up and catch you after class. They can't drop by your office. And so being very specific and clear is increasingly important in the online class. Having your class be discussion-based is a way to keep that class student-centered, and coming up with good questions that don't make students feel like you're wasting their time or that they're just hearing a bunch of drivel from other students. So coming up with quality discussions is crucial for an online class. And having regular wrap-ups is important in a class. How are you bringing stuff back together? So spreading things out in the discussions can be important. Digging down deeper can be important in discussions, but students need to have a sense of accomplishment as you go through the course, whether it be regular milestones or a final capstone, helping students to draw stuff together. It can also be helpful, particularly if it's one of your first times teaching class, to have points of informal feedback in your course, a week or two in or halfway through a course, just to see if you are doing the things that you think are effective, are matching what students see as being effective, so that your expectations are being met. And so having that informal feedback can be extremely important. Some great resources for lectures include, for audio, Audacity.com, which is a free program that you can use for recording audio lectures. For slideshows, I would recommend some of the newer versions of PowerPoint, which allow you to even save your PowerPoints as videos that can then be uploaded to places like YouTube and Vimeo. Or you can check out Prezi.com, which has another interesting way of doing slideshow presentations. For screencasting, I would recommend Screencast-O-Matic. For hosting, you can use your school, or free services like YouTube and Vimeo are also helpful. If you're looking for outside resources, you might consider TED Talks or iTunes University if you're looking for a multiplicity of voices for your online classes. And for image resources, check out the free open source pictures in Wikipedia, Flickr Commons, or holylandphotos.org for some archaeological photos. Some important books that can help you with online teaching would include Susan Coe and Steve Rawson's Teaching Online in 2005, and then Judith Botcher and Rita Marie Conrad's The Online Teaching Survival Guide. Both of those have some just real practical tips on how to go about doing teaching. They also have some theoretical components included as well. Tanya Justin has a nice book on social media for educators if you want to think about how to use things like Twitter and Facebook in your online classes. And then if you just want some practical tips of things to do, you might check out Ryan Watkins' 75 e-learning activities. This is a whole list of sample websites that you can consider making use of. There's the top 100 tools for learning. This is 2012. It's something that's updated each year, and this is just a great list of different ways to consider what you're going to bring into a class. EDUCAUSE's Learning Initiative is also just another great website that you can use to develop some of your ideas. And the Merlot Multimedia Educational Resources for Learning and Online Teaching is also incredibly helpful. You also have here listed some other websites and journals like Oracle and the International Council on Open and Distance Education, e-learning reviews, and the Journal of Interactive Online Teaching and the Journal of Online Learning and Teaching. There's tons of resources out there, and each of these links will click you to some other links, and I just hope that these are some great sample websites for you as you're developing your course. Thank you so much for joining me as we've looked at some components of effective online teaching. I'm Dr. Carl Toney with Hope International University. Best luck and best wishes as you go out and design your online course.